Hello and welcome to White Sports Talk. My name is Zach. Week 6 of the UFL season has finished off. And my predictions for Week 6, I went 3-1, giving me an overall record of 17-7 for my predictions on the season. And we're now 6 weeks in. There are now only 4 weeks left of the regular season of the UFL. Kind of in that home stretch towards the end of the regular season. There are still some very interesting matchups yet to come through the season, and a handful of teams that still have a lot to play for. With that being said, let's get into my picks for Week 7. Week 7 starts off Saturday, May 11th, with the Memphisboats, who are 1-5, taking on the Arlington Renegades, who are 0-6. Memphis lost to the Birmingham Stallions in Week 6. Memphis has been on a 5-game losing streak since beating Houston in Week 1. And they have just not looked all that good, with the exception of that Week 1 game. Their offense is last in both pass and rush yards per game this season. And their team, in the span of 2 or 3 weeks, went from number 1 in turnover differential to last in turnover differential. They've had a bit of a skid. Their defense is also last in points allowed and yards allowed. A positive for them is that they are 4th in sacks in the UFL. So there's one thing to be positive about for the Memphisboats. Moving on, the Arlington Renegades had a very close loss to the Michigan Panthers in Week 6. It was a 28-27 game where they lost on a last-second field goal. Arlington's offense is 2nd in yards per game. They're led by quarterback Luis Perez, who continues to lead the UFL in passing yardage. Their team is 3rd in turnover differential currently. Their defense is a little bit subpar below their offense. They're 7th in points allowed, 6th in yards allowed, and their rush defense is dead last in the UFL. So you're getting the dead last rushing offense this week, taking on the dead last rushing defense. So let's see if Memphis can maybe get something going on the ground this week. Arlington actually did do a pretty good job of limiting Michigan's rushing offense this past week, which I thought was surprising. I thought Michigan was going to be able to run all over them, but Arlington kind of held them in check. So I think maybe their defense is finally going to be able to start to step up and help that offense and help their offense. And I think going against Memphis, where they're going against a team that is struggling and struggles to run the ball, will be very helpful for this defense. Moving on to my pick for this week, it is going to be the Arlington Renegades. The main reason for that is just Luis Perez. And overall, throughout the season, Arlington has looked better than Memphis has. Arlington has just had a bunch of close losses. They've been in pretty much every single game, but they've wound up not being able to keep leads and suffer some very, very close losses. But I do think that Arlington can finally get a win this week. Moving on, the second game of that Saturday, it is the game that I am most excited for probably the entire regular season for the UFL season, and that is the Birmingham Stallions, who are 6-0, taking on the St. Louis Battlehawks, who are 5-1. Both these teams are number 1 in their divisions. Birmingham has actually already clinched a playoff spot because this past week, in Week 6, they beat the Memphisboats. They wound up locking up that number 1 spot in the USFL conference. Birmingham's offense continues to look very good. They continue to have the number 1 offense, led by Adrian Martinez, who he looks like he gets better every single time he starts, which is scary, because he is such a young, talented player, so he can only just keep getting better and better. Adrian Martinez is currently actually 4th in the UFL in passing yards, and he hasn't even started every single game. He's got some playing time in every game, but he hasn't started every single game. And he is 2nd in rushing yards. Again, a guy that hasn't started every game, but played in every game. He's just a dual threat quarterback that is getting better as a passer as the season goes on. For the running game, running back Ricky Pearson actually leads the UFL in rushing touchdowns now. I believe he's got 6 of them. So, very high-powered offense that's able to run and pass. That's able to very able to run the ball effectively and pass the ball effectively. It can score touchdowns. Their defense also very good. They're number 1 in points allowed and number 2 in yards allowed, and they're currently number 1 in sacks for the entire league. And their sack leader is Carlos Davis, who leads the UFL in sacks with 6 sacks. So, this offense has looked very good all season. This defense has looked very good all season. Birmingham has just continued to make the case as being the number 1 team in the UFL. Moving on to St. Louis. St. Louis beat Houston in Week 6, and they have had a 5-game winning streak. The only game they have lost this year was Week 1 to the Michigan Panthers off of a last-second field goal, in which Michigan's kicker Jake Bates made a 64-yard field goal at the end of the game to win it. That's been really their only loss, and they've won their past 5 games. Their offense continues to look very good. They're currently 4th in yards per game. The quarterback, A.J. McCarron, is 2nd in passing yards in the UFL, and Hakeem Butler, and A.J. McCarron is number 1 in passing touchdowns. And their wide receiver, Hakeem Butler, is number 1 in both receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. So, it's been a very good passing team. Their offense has had some issues on the offensive line with guys staying healthy. The DC Defender game a couple weeks ago, or Week 5, they had a handful of offensive linemen go out to the point they didn't have any backup offensive linemen that could go in. So they had 5 offensive linemen by the end of the game that were active and able to play in that game. So they have had some struggles keeping the offensive line healthy. Their defense has also come along and looked very good as the season has progressed. They are now 2nd in points allowed and 1st in yards allowed. So they're right up there with Birmingham and a lot of the stats for defense. What is my pick for this game? I am going to go with the Birmingham Stallions. Birmingham is a team that all season I have said I'm going to pick them until they prove that they're not the best team in the league. But this is honestly the closest I've come to not picking Birmingham. I think that if this game were held in St. Louis, I may have gone with the Battlehawks just because they have a crazy home field advantage because they have, get 30 to 40,000 fans. But this game is taking place in Birmingham. Birmingham has given me no reason or shown any reason why they are not the number 1 team in the league. So I am going to go with the Birmingham Stallions to win. Although I think this could be very, very close, and I would not be surprised if St. Louis did come out with a victory here. Moving on to the Sunday games for May 12th. First, you've got the Michigan Panthers, who are 4-2, taking on the DC Defenders, who are 3-3. Michigan is coming off of a 1-point victory over Arlington in Week 6. Michigan is a team that is very much competing for that second playoff spot in the USFL division. So Michigan still has plenty to play for right now. Their offense, quarterback Danny Etling has started the past 2 games due to E.J. Perry being injured, and he has looked good in those 2 starts. And in Week 6, he had 202 passing yards, and he actually led the team in rushing with 55 yards. So I talked about in my breakdown for the Arlington game that Arlington did a very good job of limiting this rushing offense. But Danny Etling still looked very good at passing and running when he could. Michigan's running back Wes Hills is currently second in rushing touchdowns in the league, and I think he is somewhere around 4 or 5 for rushing yards. So Wes Hills is a very good running back, and they've got also Matthew Colburn, who is a very good number 2 running back. So they've got a very good running back tandem. Their defense is 4th in points allowed. They're currently 5th in yards allowed, and their safety Kai Nakua still continues to lead the UFL in interceptions. One thing, Michigan's defense did have linebacker Frank Ginda go down to injury against Arlington. He wound up at the end of the game with his arm in a sling. So, not sure how long he'll be out, but if he does have to miss some games, that is a huge blow to this defense, mainly because he has kind of been their leader on that defense. It's kind of helped raise the rest of that defense up. So hopefully he can, not have to miss any time, but if he does, I think this defense will struggle a little bit. Moving on, the DC Defenders got a much needed win over the San Antonio Brahmas in week 6. DC, San Antonio, and kind of St. Louis are all still competing for those 2 playoff spots in the XFL conference. You've got St. Louis with only 1 win, with only 1 loss, and you've got San Antonio now with 2 losses, and DC, sitting at 3-3. Really right there, still in the mix. Or if one of those teams starts to struggle, DC can find themselves on a playoff spot. For DC, quarterback Jordan Teamu, their offense has looked very good this season. He's 3rd in passing yards and 2nd in passing touchdowns. And their offense has kind of come along in the running game as well. They are currently 5th in rushing yards in the league. So they have slowly been getting better over the season. They started off the first few weeks not really being able to run the ball. Their run game was very much struggling, but it looks like they have somewhat steadied that and have been getting their running game on the right track. Currently their defense has not been the best. They're 6th in points allowed and 7th in yards allowed. So their defense has had some struggles. They did look very good for the most part, against the Brahmas in week 6. And so hopefully they continue to progress as it gets closer towards playoff time. There is only 4 weeks left of the regular season. So hopefully they can put it together these next few weeks. Also, their cornerback, Mitchell Joseph, leads the UFL in tackles. So they now have the tackle leader. You never really want to see a defensive back leading your team in tackles, especially not leading a league in tackles. But they do have a stat leader. My pick for this game, I am going to go with the DC Defenders. I trust Jordan Teamu more as a quarterback and more as a player than I trust Danny Etling. And Michigan has really been getting some lucky wins this season. Last second field goal this week against Arlington. Week 5, they barely snuck out a win against the Showboats. Week 1, last second field goal to beat St. Louis. So I don't think that their run of luck can keep lasting, and I think it runs out against the DC Defenders. So I think DC, knowing how close they are and knowing what they need to do to clinch a playoff spot, it'll just elevate them that much more, and I think they wind up with the win here. The final game for Week 7 is the San Antonio Brahmas, who are 4-2, taking on the Houston Roughnecks, who are 1-5. San Antonio did lose to DC in Week 6, but still trying to compete for either the number 1 seed in the XFL conference or stay ahead of the DC Defenders and get that number 2 seed for the playoffs for the XFL conference, so still plenty for them to play for. Their offense has the past few weeks actually been led by running back John Lovett, who currently leads the UFL in rushing yards. And their defense is currently fourth in points allowed. Their defense has looked very good and very opportunistic throughout this season. And I don't really expect that to change much against the Houston Roughnecks. Houston, they lost in week 6 to St. Louis. And this team hasn't looked all that good this season. They do have one win. A few weeks ago, they did beat the Arlington Renegades. But even then, they didn't look all that good. They just seemed like they played slightly better football and managed to get the win. But this team, their offense is currently 5th in passing yards per game, and their rushing offense is currently 7th. So, kind of towards the bottom in both those categories. And they are last in points per game. So they don't gain a whole lot of yards, and they have scored the least amount of points in the league. Their defense is average, middle of the pack. They're 5th. So they're not the worst defense, but they're not really close to being the best defense either. Just kind of in the middle. I'm going to make this pick kind of short. My pick for this game is San Antonio. I like their defense more, and I think going behind that run game and that defense, they're going to be able to just kind of wear down Houston and get a victory, especially because they have so much more to play for than Houston. Houston is 3 games behind Michigan for that number 2 spot in the USFL conference for the playoff. So San Antonio, I think, has way more to play for, still trying to stay in that 3-team race in the XFL conference for 2 playoff spots. So that's my pick for this game. Let me know what you guys think of my picks for this week. If you have enjoyed the content I've made so far on the UFL, how you think things are really going to shake out going towards the playoffs, who you think is going to make it. Obviously, we know the Stallions are going to make it because they have officially clinched the spot. Who do you think is going to win between St. Louis and Birmingham? Do you think that could be the game of the season? Because I kind of think that could be the top game of the season, at least for the regular season. And those might be the 2 teams that face off in the championship. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, see ya.